Whenever the topic of point-and-click adventures comes up, you can be sure of two things. One, there's going to be bickering over whether Telltale games count as point-and-click adventures or not, and two, people will most likely be mentioning the two giants of the genre, Sierra Online and LucasArts. Both companies worked really hard on popularizing and perfecting the genre, but they definitely weren't the only ones. Many other developers and publishers had a hand in this adventurous pie, including Delphine Software with games such as Future Wars and Cruise for a Corpse, AdventureSoft with their Simon the Sorcerer series, and Cyan with their Myst series. Even Westwood Studios had a go with their beautiful Legend of Kyrandia trilogy. But of all these companies, none really left as much an impact on the point-and-click formula as the one left by Sierra Online or LucasArts. That is, except for one team. Revolution Software, a criminally underrated team. Many people might know them as the people behind masterpieces such as Beneath a Steel Sky and Broken Sword, The Shadow of the Templars. But very few understand the importance of the team's role in shaping point-and-click adventures into what they are today. The team basically revolutionized the genre with their first few titles. Even Adventure Game Studio has a build inspired by Beneath a Steel Sky. So to celebrate this company's achievements, I decided to cover every single game developed by them, from Lure of the Temptress to Broken Sword 5 The Serpent's Curse, discussing what each game added to the genre, what it did right and what it did wrong. In this video, I'll be covering Lure of the Temptress, so without further ado, grab a drink, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh, and here's your spoiler warning. Throughout this video, I'll be spoiling major plot points and puzzles in this game, including the ending. So if you're interested in playing it, I suggest you do so before watching this video. Back in 1990, Charles Cecil and Tony Warner decided that they wanted to start off their own game company, along with David Sykes and Noreen Carmody. And thus Revolution Software was born. 2 years later, their first game, Lure of the Temptress, was released. Charles wanted the game to be a fantasy adventure that differs from Sierra's King's Quest series. He made that clear when he said, "While I enjoyed Sierra games, I felt that there had to be more than yet again saving King Graham of Daventry from a, let's be frank, fairly unlikely series of events. It was all a little bit twee. So we came up with the idea of writing an adventure game that did not take itself too seriously, but did have a serious story, something in between LucasArts and Sierra." So did they accomplish that? Well, let's start the game and find out. The game starts off with the plot being told via text screens and a bit of animation, which is quite good. I especially loved the shadow art. Shame it was never used throughout the rest of the game. And those anti-aliased vines were quite the eyesore. The story is pretty simple. The fair king decided to visit a small village for hunting and hired Deermot, the game's protagonist, as the hunting party's beater. I actually had to Google that. Apparently, a beater is a person employed to flush out or drive game animals for shooting by striking at the ground cover. Honestly, I had no idea that this is a real job. People get paid to do this, even to this day. Maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. While hunting, the king was visited by a messenger informing him of Selina, a beautiful enchantress that has raised an army to take over the neighboring town of Turnvale. And due to a fairly unlikely series of events, Deermot gets involved and rides with the party to fight off the invasion. Little did they know the army was not of humans, but rather an army of squirrels, an orc-like creature. Unsurprisingly, the king dies and Deermot loses consciousness, only to wake up in a cell realizing he was captured and held prisoner in the Turnvale dungeons. And that's where the game starts. This cell is a good place to teach you how the game works. The interface is similar to that of Delphine's game, specifically the one used in Cruise for a Corpse. Basically, you get a label when hovering over a hotspot and left-clicking it automatically examines it. By right-clicking said hotspot, you open up a Dropbox list, containing all the actions you can carry out on it, such as take, talk to, or drink. Right-clicking on a blank space allows you to either examine the room you're in, a la old Sierra games, or examine your inventory. Although it isn't perfect, I still prefer it over the interfaces of Sierra's and LucasArts games back in the day. I'm not a huge fan of the verb interface in games such as The Secret of Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle. To me, it just feels like overcomplicating the gameplay for no reason. And I really dislike Sierra's actions interface. In theory, it's not bad, but they had to ruin it by not highlighting hotspots you could interact with, meaning you're forced to click around hoping to find the hotspot you need. So yeah, I prefer the one in this game. In this specific room, you can interact with your hay bed, the torch, the door, a crack in the wall, and the window. Interacting with the window tells you that you could have looked through it if it wasn't so far up. However, you could look through the crack in the wall if you want to. This teaches you that sometimes you can actually look through a window or an opening in order to see stuff that you weren't meant to see. But we'll get to that later. For now, we need to focus on breaking out of this cell. If you wait long enough, you'll notice that the squirrel guarding your cell keeps checking on you every now and again, so you probably need to take advantage of that, perhaps causing a distraction so you can slip out while the squirrel is busy. The logical solution to me was to pick up the torch and use it to burn the hay bed. But apparently the developers didn't trust me with that solution and instead decided to make Dearmont a clumsy git who accidentally drops the torch on the bed anyway. Come to think of it, the bed and room descriptions makes me think that Dearmont has been here for quite some time, which leads me to believe that he is too stupid to do this before I told him to. I mean, he even mentions how the squirrel checking up on him is a recurring thing. I can even tell him to touch the fire and he'll do it, like the moron he is. Anyway, the bed is on fire and the squirrel is distracted for a few seconds, giving you enough time to escape the room, close the door, and lock it. Now that the squirrel is locked up, you're free to look around. In the second room, you find a window that looks into your cell to see the squirrel stomping around angrily, again preparing you for upcoming situations. You find two prisoners around you, one of which is too thirsty to talk and the other is a jester tied to a rack. I want to talk about that rack later, so keep it in mind. You cut the jester free and he tells you that his name is Rat Pouch. From this point on, he acts as your companion for most of the game. You give the thirsty prisoner a drink and he tells you that his name is Wolf and that he's part of a resistance group fighting against the squirrel invasion. He asks you to inform the blacksmith that the girl is in danger. He then tells you that there are bricks on the opposite wall that are loose, and then dies. Or at least I think he dies. This is a very minor thing to complain about, but I found it very annoying that Wolf's description does not change after he dies. So which is it, Dearmont? Is he dead or is he close to death? Armed with that knowledge, you try and push the bricks. However, Dearmont's extremely buff body isn't strong enough to do that, so you need Rat Pouch, the scrawny, toothpick-like jester, to push them for you. Look, I get it. They needed a simple puzzle to teach you that you can give your companions specific tasks. But could they not have found a more believable puzzle for that? I mean, look at Dearmont. Are you telling me he can't push those bricks, yet this living stick can? You feel a slight movement, but your bruised and aching muscles prevent you from mustering the required force to push the wall harder. Oh, sure. But the little kid who's been screaming his lungs out because he was being tortured on the rack can easily push the bricks. Oh, and speaking of which, remember that rack? Well, I guess now's a good time to talk about it. See, if you operate the rack before freeing Rat Pouch, you get a funny line of dialogue. Operate it again, however, and Rat Pouch dies. You know what that means, right? If he dies, you have no way of pushing those bricks, which means you're stuck here, which means you've been hit with a Sierra-like dead end. You might argue that this was done to show the player that your actions could lead to an unwinnable situation, but here's my counter-argument. There are only 3 unwinnable situations in this game. The first is the one with Rat Pouch dying. The second is if you spend all your money before you bribe Morcus. But I had to go out of my way to do that. No other NPC in the game can be bribed, which means the only way to lose all your money is by continuously spending your groats on pints of beer at the tavern, which, might I add, doesn't seem to do anything to you. The third one happens in the final act, so without going into much detail, here's the gist of it. You need to uncork this wine casket in order to distract a specific squirrel, but if you take too long, the wine runs out, and there's no other way to move on. This one is completely unfair. Unlike the first two, where one is at the start of the game and the other is almost impossible to achieve, this one is so easy to fall for. You have no way of knowing that A, you need to do this in order to bypass that squirrel, and B, the wine would run out. So if you haven't saved recently, or if you're only using one save slot and you happen to save after uncorking it, that's it. Game over. You have to restart the entire game. I tried looking for other situations, but none of the ones that would have made sense turned out to be dead ends. For example, if you refuse Malin's request, you can easily tell him that you've changed your mind. Later on in the game, Malin asks you to give a book he stole to Morcus. In order to progress, however, you need to return it to its original owners. So I tried giving the book to Morcus, expecting another dead end. But nope, he just flat out refused the book, multiple times. So yeah, this one at the start, along with the other two, are completely unnecessary. Look, I don't know if there are people who actually enjoy dead ends in adventure games, but if you're one of them, then good for you. Just stay away from me and my kids. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now that you've escaped with Rat Pouch, you have one goal: find the blacksmith. And this is a good place to talk about the Virtual Theater, the engine created by Revolution Software. Their goal with this engine was to make NPCs more lifelike, where they would walk around town, talk to other NPCs, and not just stay stationary in one position. That wasn't unheard of in video games back in the day, but it was definitely revolutionary for the point-and-click genre. But even the best ideas are sometimes much better on paper than they are in execution. Sadly, that's the case with this game. See, as cool as it may be to have NPCs being active, it also means that you'll be spending a lot of time wandering around town looking for a specific NPC. Take this part for example. I need to talk to Malin, but I can't seem to find him anywhere. I kept looking around for so long until I finally found him. Even Rat Pouch isn't always by your side, which means sometimes you're gonna have to wait for him to show up so you could ask him to do something for you. Anyway, each NPC is initially referred to as Stranger, which changes to their name after you've learned it. So in order to find someone specific, you have to talk to every NPC in town in order to find out who they are. Except for squirrels, they are just referred to as squirrels. After looking around and talking to NPCs, you eventually find the blacksmith, Luthern. You give him Wolf's message and he tells you that the girl Wolf's talking about is Goen, the local herbalist, and tells you that she has recently disappeared. And now your task is to find her. You ask around hoping that someone in town might have an idea on where she is. In fact, I'd say most of the puzzles in this game can be solved by talking to NPCs, hoping that one of them has what you need to progress. Sometimes the NPCs will know nothing, while other times they will nudge you to the right direction. For example, at the Magpie Tavern, you find Morcus drinking on his own. If you ask him about Goen, he'll get suspicious of you and will ask you for proof that you're not working for Selina. Obviously, he knows something. If you bribe him, he'll tell you where they took her. At this point, you should have groats to spare, since you've already talked to Malin, the shifty-looking guy roaming around. He gives you a metal bar to give to Ewan, the shopkeeper. Giving the bar to Ewan will get you 12 groats and a lovely pendant. So unless you spent all your groats on beer, you'll be fine. As for the pendant, you're supposed to give it to Nelly, the owner of the Magpie Tavern. I quite like this puzzle because the only hint you get is the sign outside the tavern that has a picture of a magpie holding that exact pendant. As a reward, she gives you a flask filled with a potent drink. Try drinking it and you'll get a very amusing dialogue with a funny punchline. You do not end up in an unwinnable situation, by the way. You hear that, Sierra? Maybe you don't have to screw me over for trying things out, yeah?
That was the best custard pie Graham has ever eaten.
Oh, and if you ask Nellie about Goen before bribing Morcus, she tells you that a squirrel came in yesterday, spoke to Morcus, then left. This is more or less how all story progression goes. You just ask around. I don't mind that actually, because it does help build this world, making it more believable. And the writing in this game is pretty good. The jokes are funny enough and the dialogue is silly enough to be entertaining yet serious enough to provide a good plot. And there aren't that many people to talk to anyway, so it's not as bad as it sounds. Or at least it wouldn't be as bad as it sounds if the town wasn't so confusing. Basically, each screen is one area of the town, with walkways to take you to the next part of town. Some screens are important, while others are just pretty vistas. And then you have these hallways. Looking for NPCs wouldn't be as much of a chore if it weren't for these damned hallways. They are so useless and serve no purpose other than to confuse and annoy you. They all look the same and are quite disorienting at times. To make matters worse, sometimes NPCs would be here. Good luck finding that one particular NPC you need when they're hiding in one of these hallways. Oh, and speaking of NPCs, I want to introduce you to one of them. This is Geraint, the owner of the Severed Arms Tavern. Geraint is special. He doesn't like idle chit-chat. He only talks to you if you buy a drink. Don't. Whatever you do, do not waste your money on him. He is absolutely useless. He never tells you anything worthwhile, and all you'll end up with is one less groat in your pocket and you're none the tipsier. And don't even believe other NPCs that tell you that Geraint knows anything. He doesn't. Anyway, now we know where Goen is and we need to save her. You tell Luthern what you learned and he tells you to find Grub. A bit of asking around will help you realize that he's the old beggar sitting outside the Magpie. If you talk to him, he'll tell you that you need the help of Tade, the magician, and gives you a lockpick. When you ask around, you'll find out that Tade has disappeared in mysterious circumstances and that his house has been locked up. Talking to Eileen about Tade makes her extremely anxious to the point where she accidentally outs herself and gives you the magician's diary, which she apparently found while searching his house. You know, every time I talk to Eileen, she acts more and more suspicious. Makes me feel like she's some kind of double agent working for Selina or something. But that plotline doesn't go anywhere, so I feel like it's a missed opportunity, to be honest. They could have done something with her character, or at least tell us what happened to her at the end of the game. I mean, even Morcus at the end gets his comeuppance. But I digress. Reading the diary reveals that Tade was working on a potion that would transform him into Selena. Immediately, the thought of transforming into her and rescuing Goen from the town hall becomes apparent. Now you just need to get into his house. Of course, since Rat Pouch has been useless all this time, why not give him another arbitrary task, eh? It turns out that Dermot does not know how to use a lockpick, so you need to give it to Rat Pouch, then instruct him to open the door. Why is this a thing? Why would we ever think that a jester might be good at lockpicking? Why did the developers have to go out of their way to make Rat Pouch useful? Why doesn't Dermot say anything to imply that Rat Pouch might be able to open this door instead of him? If you use the lockpick yourself, all it says is nothing happens. That's the same thing it says whenever you use any wrong item on a hotspot. Why couldn't it have said something like, Dermot is too stupid to use this lockpick. Perhaps you might find someone else to do it for him, someone smarter, a jester perhaps. And why is Dermot so damn useless? He sucks as a protagonist. Once Rat Pouch unlocks the door, you go into the house and finish the magician's work. After the brewing process is complete, you fill the empty flask with the potion. Oh hey, I forgot to tell you how the flask became empty. Can you guess? Go ahead, guess. I'll give you a minute. Done guessing? Well, if you guessed empty the flask anywhere because who cares about Nellie's drink, you'd be wrong. You can't drink it either because, again, Dermot is a worthless human being who can't handle his liquor. No, the only way to get rid of the flask's contents is to give it to Luthern. You can't give it to anyone else, only Luthern will drink it. Okay, so, why? Why was this a necessary puzzle? It's just a drink. I don't get why I had to go give it to a specific NPC just to be able to use the empty flask. And there are no hints that you need to do that, by the way. This isn't like other puzzles where you just have to talk to people. Even talking to Lutheran won't help because there's no dialogue option to give him the flask. You have to actually give it to him using the give command. I guess you could argue that seeing him complaining about Geraint's ale is reason enough to think that he might want a better drink, but come on. Don't you think that's a bit stretching it? Especially when in real life all you need to do is just empty the damn thing in a sewer or something? So anyway, you get the potion, drink it, and turn yourself into Selina. Now you can go into the town hall where Gawain is being held without worries. You go there, order the squirrels to release her, then follow her to her shop. You talk to her, then walk 2 screens away, then you'll turn back into your old self. I believe that's the only way to turn back. I tried waiting, but it didn't work. This event probably needed a trigger, and apparently that trigger was talking to Gawain while you're still in Selena form. Not really a big deal. I doubt anyone would have had an issue figuring this out, even if it's quite arbitrary. After turning back, you go and talk to Gawain again. In doing so, you get treated to the cheesiest, most ham-fisted romantic moment you'll ever see in a video game. And I want you to keep it in mind. It will come up later, and it's definitely gonna be worth it. So now that Gawain is free, what's next? Back to talking to all NPCs again. Although this time, you'll notice that the monastery has hung up a sign next to its door. Apparently the monk's holy book has been stolen and they're offering a reward to anyone who retrieves it. Since it's a stolen item, you naturally think of Malin, and sure enough, upon talking to him, he asks you to give it to Morcus. As I mentioned before, you can't do that, which means the only thing you can do is take it back to the monastery. Well then, I think it's time to come clean. I've been playing this game on an Amiga emulator. Sure, it's available on GOG for free, but that's the DOS version, and I prefer the Amiga one because of better sounds and better music. The game barely has any music, but what's there is just better on the Amiga. As for the sound, well, you decide. Which one of these two actually sounds like a hammer hitting an anvil? Whichever version you choose to play though, do not play it on ScumVM. The game runs horribly on that. The pathfinding is abysmal. I mean, come on, just move over for crying out loud! You know, I just realized I haven't talked about the visuals yet. I guess there's not much to talk about. They're not remarkable, but they're pretty enough, especially for 91-92. The backgrounds are pretty and colorful, and the sprites are functional. The animation leaves a bit to be desired though. Out of the two versions, I would say that the DOS version is better looking just because of the brighter colors. So if you're willing to deal with, I suggest you go with that version. For this part, I'm gonna switch to the DOS version just to spare you that horrible color glitch. You give the monks their book back and ask them if they know any way to defeat Selena. They tell you that you should ask the help of the dragon. They also tell you the ingredients of a potion that will help you ensnare the dragon, because he's probably not gonna help you if he had a choice. Oh, and by the way, thanks to Dirmon's stupidity, I get insulted by the monk. I didn't tell him to ask that. I know the answer. You go to Gawain and ask her to mix the potion for you. She tells you that she ran out of cowbane. She mentions that Wolf was supposed to get her some, but we know that he's hanging between death and closeness to death for eternity, so that's probably not gonna happen. So it's up to you to find it. And again, much like the flask, this was a poorly designed puzzle. This is the flower you're supposed to get. How would you know that? No idea. It wasn't even a hotspot before this conversation, and there are no indications that this is what you needed. Heck, she never even tells you that it's a flower, you just have to know that on your own. I actually had to Google this, and I'm pretty sure Google didn't exist back then, so if you wanted to know what cowbane was, you had to go to the library, and you'll still be none the wiser, because real-life cowbane does not look anything like the one in the game. I guess the only hint is that Wolf had a pouch with a dust-like substance in it that smells a bit like lavender and stitchwort. And since stitchworts and lavenders are flowers, you might think cowbane is as well. But that's also stretching it a lot. At any rate, you get her the flower and she head bobs till the potion is done. Now you need to find the dragon. At this point, you've probably already talked to Ultar the barbarian. He tells you where the dragon den is and how to enter it. Unfortunately, the gargoyles guarding the dragon's den won't allow you in because you have a penis. So you need to bring someone to help you that probably doesn't have one. The only girl who could help you is Goen. You take her to the entrance and she opens the door for you, but instead of going back to her shop, she decided to come in with you, out of curiosity. So for this part, and only this part, she's your rat pouch. Wow, that sounds a lot worse than it actually is. Upon entering, you'll find yourself navigating between 3 colored caves with movable skulls to open and close doors. The puzzle here is a pretty simple trial and error type, where you ask Goen to go to a specific room and move a specific skull for you. Oh, and I say ask, but I don't think Dirmot is really asking. After what she says the second time you tell her to do something, I imagine Dirmot is probably barking these orders at her. Geez, real smooth there, lover boy. Anyway, after successfully opening the final door, you are greeted with one of the worst action sequences I've ever played in any adventure game, where you fight this mean-looking monster which is much larger than any squirrel in the game. Keep that in mind. This fight is abysmal. Basically, you click in front of you to move forward and behind you to move backwards. Click on your head and you make this downward hack. Click on your legs and you make a low sweeping attack. Clicking in the middle makes you perform this simple stab motion. I'm generally not a fan of action sequences in adventure games, but this one in particular is really bad. The worst part about it is that it's not even challenging. All you need to do is just keep moving forward to corner him while making quick middle jabs. You'll beat him in no time, it's ridiculous. And to make matters worse, you do this fight twice in the game. I'm skipping ahead a bit here, but you get the same exact fight in the room before Selina's. Why would they ask you to do this twice? I mean, it would make sense in Selina's case since she's probably being guarded anyway, but why would a dragon need guarding? He's a dragon! After killing the beast, Dermot decides to keep the axe he found. You enter the dragon's... He kept the axe! Did you read that? He kept the axe. He has the axe. So, why am I worried about squirrels anymore? I mean, I've already beaten a beast way bigger than they are. So, and I've already proven that I'm efficient at it. Twice. So why am I even worried Sorry. I'll move on now. You enter the dragon's cave and you immediately use the potion of ensnaring on him. If you don't, he'll burn you alive. After ensnaring him and commanding him to help, he tells you of the source of Selina's power. He tells you of an old and powerful demon that feeds on human greed and ambition, a creature as old as time. He also tells you of the great hero Gethrin, who was able to banish said demon, and how Selina was able to reawaken it only to end up being controlled by it. The dragon then gives you the Eye of Gethrin, a powerful item that can be used to banish the demon for good. Why didn't the dragon use it himself? And why did Gethrin even leave the eye with him? I don't think even the developers knew, so let's just accept it as a Deus Ex Machina. Now that we have the eye, we can take on Selina. We just need to find a way to enter the castle, since I doubt they'd let us go through the front door. You ask around and Malin gives you a hint as to how you can enter. Well, I say hint, but it's more of a vague nudge. All he does is tell you to watch the patrolling squirrels since one of them is acting suspiciously. So based on that alone, you need to know that the squirrel you're after is this particular one who goes into Ewan's shop. Although it's not an intuitive puzzle at all, I don't think it's as bad as one might think. There aren't that many squirrels patrolling anyway, so finding the right one shouldn't take that long. But I still think this should have been communicated better to the player. The only real hint you'll get is that if you go into the shop while the squirrel is talking to Ewan, the squirrel cuts Ewan off and says, "And this is your final warning, alright?" Ewan is clearly surprised by this, so it's obvious that the scroll doesn't want you to hear what he has to say to Ewan. So you probably need to find a way to eavesdrop on their conversation. Remember how the game taught you back in the dungeons that you could look through openings and windows? Well, now's your chance to put that into action. You exit the shop, look through the window, and read their dialogue boxes. As it turns out, this particular squirrel isn't happy with Selina, but he can't do anything about it because she's probably protected by some anti-squirrel magic. He tells Ewan to hide in a barrel so that later on he can sneak him into the castle so that Ewan can kill her instead. Ewan is naturally scared, but the squirrel just doesn't care. So that's your cue. You go in and tell Ewan that you'll take his place in the barrel. After a cool comic book-like cutscene, you find yourself in the castle's wine cellar. From this point on, I'm going to be using footage from the DOS version because for some reason the Amiga version glitched out. See, I'm supposed to hide from this squirrel behind this post, but no matter how many times I try, he keeps finding me. Besides, I wouldn't even dream of denying you the glorious battle sounds of the DOS version. So now you need to find a way to Selina's quarters. The good news is all the squirrels are drunk. The bad news is, one of them isn't completely drunk, so you have to get rid of him. Oh, if there was only a way! Talking to the squirrel's servant, Minnow, you find out that the sober one hates wasting wine. As I mentioned before, in order to get past this squirrel, you need to uncork the wine casket, tell the kid to summon the squirrel, hide behind a post, then wait till the moron just flops comically under the leak, leaving the rest of the castle free for you to explore. Leaving aside the fact that I still have an axe that I could use to kill this squirrel, so why I even need to do all of this is beyond me. I mean, it's not like any of his friends are going to try to defend him. This puzzle overall is just a complete mess. How am I supposed to know that I need to hide behind this post? Sure, Minnow tells you to hide, but it's not like the post is an obvious hiding place. I mean, look at it. You can still clearly see me standing behind it. Anyway, now that the squirrel is out of the way, you're free to go after Selina. Minnow tells you where she is and tells you that you need to lower the drawbridge in order to get to her. In my opinion, this is the only puzzle in the game that actually took advantage of the companion system. See, after experimenting with the drawbridge mechanism for a while, you learn that you need two people to operate it. One to operate the winch and the other to pull the lever. So you tell Minnow to pull the lever while you operate the winch. I felt like every other puzzle in this game that relies on your companion was forced and unnecessary. This one genuinely felt like it earned it, so it's a shame that there aren't more like it. You lower the drawbridge, defeat the guard, and then you finally get to face Selina. Well, Dearmot gets to face Selina, you just get to watch. Final spoiler alert, by the way, this is the last cutscene in the game. After that amazing fight with the strongest creature to ever walk the earth, you get a wall of text telling you what happens next. Remember when I told you to keep that ham-fisted romantic moment between Dearmot and Gawain in mind? Well, this is what it was building up for. Yup, she ends up marrying Luthern and has his kids. You leave Turnvale never to be heard of again. Wow, what an ending, yeah? In fact, I think Gawain still doesn't know Dearmot's name. And that's Lure of the Temptress. It's nothing amazing, but it's definitely a great start for a great team. The writing is good, the story is serviceable, and the visuals are not bad at all. But it definitely didn't age well. The story, while serviceable, was too simple, and some of the puzzles were just too convoluted. And as brilliant as the idea of virtual theater was, I doubt that this is the game to show off the engine's potential. Still, it was fun while it lasted, and I think it's worth a try, especially since it's completely free on GOG. To me, it isn't much of a game, but rather a proof of concept for a much better game that is yet to come. Speaking of which, in the next video we'll be looking at the team's second game, Beneath a Steel Sky. So I'll see you then, thanks for watching.